College in Massachusetts. And recently, her book called Democracy Awakening, which she presented her talk at the Emmanuel Congregation as part of the Progressive Forum series, which has been going on for 18 years in Houston. We could call her a progressive. But I'll go on with the actual talk. Most of us remember this weekend, many of us were reminded of that day of insurrection. But you may not remember the cover boy of that old icon of my adolescence, Alfred E. Neuman of Mad Magazine. As I recall his tagline, his words for reflection were always, "What? Me worry? I'm worried. I wonder how many others of us are worried about what might happen during the next 310 days until November 5th. The local primaries, runoffs, elections. Turns out there are 4 major elections listed on the election calendar in Texas the next 310 days. Not to mention 365 days from today, the next January 6th, when electoral votes will be counted again. Suppose Paul Revere, that celebrated Boston silversmith, coppersmith, and Unitarian, were alive today. We could imagine that Paul Revere might be driving a golf cart through the suburbs, warning America, democracy is at risk. Fascists are coming. In our own era, we don't expect folks with megaphones to ride horses and golf carts through our neighborhoods. We are blessed and burdened with so many more efficient communications, not only through old-style mass media like magazines, books, newspapers, television, radio, but also the incredible volume of emails, blogs, and social networks, not to mention the robocalls that we try to block. Like you, in just the past few months, I have received literally thousands of emails with news reports and articles intended to raise consciousness about the possible future of our system of government, the risks of our ignorance or complacency. But if we turn our attention in recent history to the presidential administrations since W. was retired in 2009, when we actually saw the tremendous backlash following Obama's unambiguous election victory and his signature health care plan. It didn't even help when Senator McCain, a respected war hero, denied his supporters lies and conceded the day after the elections. That's when we saw the seemingly spontaneous formation of what was called the Tea Party, of libertarian anti-tax activists. The ones we could see were in pickup trucks, but the ones we didn't see were in their towers writing checks. They couldn't possibly have been set off by dog whistle political activation of self-described birthers who denied the citizenship of the duly elected president. Who would raise doubts or lie about reality and facts, recorded facts, in the Hawaii state government files and in the newspaper files relating to the birth of one Barack Hussein Obama? Their narrative was elemental. They said Obama couldn't have been born in Hawaii. It had to be part of a conspiracy. And someone with 3 weird names and a middle name Hussein was suspect anyway. Shouldn't we have seen that as an obvious racist appeal? Shouldn't everyone have seen it in reaction to the election of the first black and mixed race president? Who would promote such blatant exploitation of racist memes? Could it have possibly been a calculated campaign for undermining democracy itself? This is part of an underlying narrative which I will try to address in just a few minutes. But time has passed, and a new president was elected and showed his own personal biases. Now, this is a non-sectarian and nonpartisan presentation. This is not about one party versus another. My talk today is about democracy. But we know that all of this was a part of the context of September 2019 initiation of a daily email blog from this modern-day progressive, Heather Cox Richardson, whom I see as a Pauline Revere of our own time, who began in September 2019 to write a daily email to provide her summary of political and legal developments, her perspective of linking the long cycles of American history to what we know is today's reality. Now, she might say that history doesn't really repeat itself, but it's recursive. That means it comes back on some of the same themes over and over again. Now, Heather Cox Richardson has a growing list of readers, currently over 1 million, who have awakened each of the following 1,500 mornings since that first letter from an American to find her well-framed perspectives of contemporary history in the making. In October, as I mentioned, as part of her tour to promote this latest book, Democracy Awakening, Dr. Richardson came to Houston as a featured speaker in this Progressive Forum series. On the way into her lecture, I saw several UU folks who also had this new book in their hands. So it was affirming that I was among whom people I might think of as fellow travelers, to use a phrase that's been abused. It's an easy read if you skip the citations at the end, which go on for 30 or 40 pages, where she cites her sources meticulously. As a tenured professor at Boston College, she has wisely used her recent sabbaticals from teaching to write and then promote her analysis of current events in quick and easy-to-read formats. She says she got 10 years of practice for this by editing a children's history magazine. Dr. Richardson claims her political ideals are as a Lincoln Republican, and so she refers often to the time of Lincoln and the time of the Reconstruction following the Civil War. She notes that Lincoln emphasized that those trying to destroy democracy in his era were not the conservatives they claimed to be, but were dangerous radicals whose version of America must have been rejected. He called on his neighbors, Lincoln did, to defend equality before the law and the right of everyone to consent to the government under which they live, to reclaim the history of America at that time so that it would have a new birth of freedom. We had our responsive reading where he talked about he didn't want to be a master and he didn't want to be a slave, and he didn't think anybody else should be either. But when Lincoln said those words in 1863, it was not at all clear that his vision of what America came from and what it should be, it was not clear that that would prevail. But he had hope, because after decades in which the people had not noticed what the powerful were doing to destroy democracy, Americans had begun to waken. They realized that the very nature of what it meant to be America was under attack. They were divided among themselves, and at first they really didn't know how to fight back. But ordinary people quickly came to pitch in however they could, using the tools they had. Once they were awake, they found the strength of their majority. In Lincoln's era, democracy appeared to have won, but the Americans of Lincoln's time did not root out the hierarchical strand of our history, leaving it there for other rising autocrats in the future to exploit with their rhetoric and the fears of their followers. The rise of authoritarian movements continues today. But so far, the hopes of our founders have never been fully right, and yet they have not been proven entirely wrong. Heather Cox Richardson says, once again, we are at a time of testing, and how it comes out rests, as it always has, in our own hands. So this new book illustrates very simply how the dominant recurrent or recursive trends of American history have cycled between those two adversarial philosophical traditions. One perspective is that it is most appropriate to use the power and resources of the federal government to regulate and redistribute economic power to provide greater social and economic equality. This view emphasizes the democratic ideals of the Declaration of Independence and an evolving, not a static, Constitution. The polar opposite position, which has been a dominant trend for most of the past 40 years since the election of Ronald Reagan, calls for deregulation to advance and protect the political power and economic dominance of property owners who control our capital resources. Dr. Richardson says that the wisdom of the framers of the Constitution has provided the institutional strength of the federal government, but the evolving recent dominance of anti-democratic and authoritarian influence in the federal courts is definitely a reason for concern, a reason to awaken. My colleague, Reverend Cecilia Kingman, was the designated lecturer for the annual ministry conference on Berry Street as part of our General Assembly in Pittsburgh this last summer. Cecilia presented a challenging analysis of what she calls our cultural drift toward the F word, fascism, which raised a few ministers' eyebrows at least a little. I bring you a few excerpts from her 90-minute speech, which you don't have to hear all of. For those of us who are white, which is 90% of us in the room and 90% of Unitarian Universalists, being taught to overlook the atrocities done by our ancestors and the continued oppression and land theft being done by our own people, especially when we are told that this oppression and theft is done to secure our own future, is injurious to our souls. Our turning away from truth is demanded of children long before the child can be considered complicit in their own spirit. But even when we're young, most of us do have, deep down, an awareness that something isn't right, that we are being lied to, that we are being enrolled in and then ultimately choose to participate in a system of oppression. This doesn't mean that we are inherently racist, but we are part of a racist system. The awareness that we bring causes a particular form of moral injury, guilt, that white people, especially white men like me, have been passing down generation after generation. And it is absolutely against the rules of whiteness to discuss the psychic wounds of learning to be an oppressor, to participate in an oppressive and racist system. Our moral injury makes fertile ground for fascism, the belief in one's own special place, combined with this unconscious indoctrination into the belief that we are special, that we deserve what we got. The immoral deal that we must make to trade parts of ourselves for that myth of superiority, an injury which creates a psychological and moral framework that makes us vulnerable to fascist ideology. White people's moral injury and generational trauma are not comparable to the horrific violence directed at indigenous and black and brown people. But white people, like me, must dig into our own generational trauma to understand our current situation. White nationalism, Christian white nationalism, gets its hooks into white people because of this unacknowledged, unhealed white trauma. Telling the truth about what is happening is crucial to resisting the fascism that is all around us. But fascism outside of us seems obvious. When we see it in Europe, oh yeah, there's fascist movement in France, there's fascist movement in Germany, there's fascist movement in Russia, autocracy in general. We all know that we are in a moment of great danger. If anyone is left wondering how bad it is, it's very, very bad. It's alarmingly easy, however, for us to grow acclimated and numb to be exhausted by the warnings of Paul Revere, saying the British are coming, the fascists are coming. You hear it over and over, and you just say, I just can't react anymore. I'm emotionally drained. But we have to pay rigorous attention to the strategies that are being used by those who would make fascism the dominant rule of our nation. We are also seeing a rise in fascist thinking within our own Unitarian Universalist faith community. Not necessarily political ideologies, but the style of thinking. Cecilia says, please understand I do not say this lightly. Unitarian Universalism is currently in a moment of major theological transformation and institutional reform. This transition, especially over the past 10 years, is causing a backlash within our congregations and among some of our colleagues. It's usually a small number of people, a small number of ministers, a small number of folks who want to hold on to the old way of things where good old boys who pay their dues get their rewards. But we are moving away from individualism that says that I got mine, I know what I am, what's wrong with the rest of you? We are moving away from individualism to communitarian values, from white supremacy culture to truly radical liberation, from a concentration of power among historically privileged groups and towards a new form of power sharing. Some are responding to these power shifts with anxiety and conflict and worry, generalized anxiety and worry. Some of us are being asked to give up the primacy of privilege and power and respond with tactics drawn from fascist politics, name-calling, accusing the others of putting something over on us, the people who are advocating for change, which would make everything more equitable for everybody. So, I found a particular set of things about what worrying is. Worrying is a recursive mental attempt to resolve a situation that has an uncertain and positively negative outcome. It's similar to rumination, which is to focus on something over and over again, in that both are repetitive and self-focused and feature an inability to shift attention from negative thoughts. Both activities harm our attention, erode our actual skills of problem solving, and worsen our mood. We get depressed when we get worried, most of us. And you worry about a conversation you need to have tomorrow. You worry about what might happen in the future. I found words from a statesman, a prominent public figure, not from Alfred E. Newman or Mad Magazine, about our own real worries. This writer says, the American people today are anxious, worried about their present reality and worried about the future that awaits their children and grandchildren. They know that the status quo is not working and that in many respects the system seems to be breaking down. And so they know change is coming. The question is, what kind of change will it be? Will it be authoritarian type change that exploits our anger and our uncertainty and turns it against minorities and immigrants, blaming them for the crises we are experiencing? Or will it be a change that revitalizes our American democracy, that unites and empowers working people of all backgrounds, and has the courage to take on a corrupt ruling class whose greed continues to cause irreparable destruction of our country and the world itself in our environmental changes? There is no question but the challenges we face today are enormous, both economic and political and environmental as well. There is no easy path forward when we take on oligarchs and the most powerful entities in the world, all around the world. America is not alone in struggling with these forces. But in the midst of all that, here is a simple truth. If we stand together in our common humanity, black, white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, gay, straight, brown, people of all religions, there are enormous opportunities in front of us to create a better life for everyone. We can guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a human right. We can create millions of good-paying jobs, transforming our energy system. We can create the best educational system in the world. We can use artificial intelligence in constructive ways to shorten our work week and improve the lives of everyone. We can create a society free of bigotry. But here's the other simple truth. None of that can happen if we're not prepared to stand up and fight together against the forces that work so hard to divide and conquer us. This is a moment in history that cannot be ignored. This is a struggle that cannot be sat out. The future of the planet is at stake. Democracy is at stake. Human decency is at stake. We must go forward together. Words by Senator Bernie Sanders. But what can we do between now and 310 days from now, that November 5th election? What can we do to help save American democracy? I found a few suggestions which I have condensed from Professor Robert Reich, formerly one of the cabinet secretaries in an earlier administration. He says, first, become a political activist and don't succumb to the tempting anesthesia of either complacency or cynicism. The stakes are too high. I saw an email today from one of my colleagues who was proudly saying that he was writing a check to Marianne Williamson. I beg you not to do that. We know that Hillary Clinton and versus Trump was decided because of the Green Party votes that were taken, which should have been hers, which would have been hers. Second, counter lies with truth and do not tolerate bigotry, hate, and other lies. Call it out, stand up to it, denounce it, demand that others denounce it. 3, do not resort to name-calling, bullying, intimidation, or violence, the tactics of fascism. And be compassionate toward those who hold opposite views, but be firm in your opposition. Number 4, don't waste your time and energy commiserating with people who already agree with you and persuading people who won't be persuaded that they must stand on the side of democracy. Finally, demonstrate, if you will, demonstrate with conscience, but don't mistake demonstrating for real political action that has influence, because you can get distracted by the latest sensational post or story by or about your opponents. Demonstration in favor of something, as in with the Women's March, the day after the inauguration in 2017. Is that when it was? 2021, whatever it was. The Women's March that went all over the world. Those demonstrations were in favor of something. We know that the American people today are worried, anxious about their present reality and worried about the future that awaits us. Let us go forward as true progressive conservatives to preserve the freedoms of the 235 years of our constitutional history. Let us persuade ourselves that it is all about what we are doing, what we can do, what we need to do. I would ask you now to pause with me for a few moments of meditation and prayer. Today we have come together to support each other in times of joy, in times of loss, in times of grief, in times of uncertainty. We know that life is full of anxiety and worry. And it is our choice to be engaged, to comfort each other, to understand each other, to offer support that we can to those who are less fortunate than we. I bring a poem adapted from Philip Appleman. I've had enough of turning to look back, the old regret of defeat, the people I loved but didn't touch, the friends I haven't seen for years, the strangers who smiled but didn't speak. These are my failures. No, I refuse to leave it at that, because somewhere January is coming out like Venus rising up from the murk of December, as innocent of loss as any dawn. Resolved, this year, I'm going to break my losing streak. I'm going to stay alert, reach out, speak when not spoken to, try to read the minds of people in the streets. I'm going to try to practice every day to stay in training and be moderate on all things but love. And to take that love, that passionate, committed, concerned love for my fellow humans and for the world, and make the best contribution I can to make it better, to bring comfort, to bring solace, to bring understanding of the human condition, and to do what I can to support the institutions that bring equality, justice, and compassion to our communities and to us as human beings in a world that we care for. Blessed be. Ashe. Amen. May it be so.